Cool. Well, welcome everybody. I'll be presenting on my recent trip to Indonesia. I was there for 2 weeks in late April, early May of 2024. This was a couples trip, just me and my wife. I planned the whole thing, did all the logistics, all the purchasing. None of it was group tours or what have you. And I'll go into all of this in some pretty good detail. I'll also say that this was our second time to Indonesia. The first time was in 2019. We spent the bulk of the trip in Sulawesi, with a few days at the end in Bali. This time around, we went to a different main location. We did spend a few days in Bali retracing some steps and adding some new ones. So just some additional exposition before I jump into it. You might hear me reference a past trip and things like that. So the table of contents today, what we're going to cover is Komodo National Park, which was the main draw of the trip. Komodo's well known for being one of the best scuba diving locations in the world, especially for coral reef and large fish and water aquatic species. A brief stop in Labuan Bajo, which is the sort of the gateway to Komodo, the town that you have to fly into to get there. And then back to Bali with some time in Ahmed and Tulamben, most of which will be was where we retraced our steps from last time. Canggu, which is on the west coast of Bali, known far and wide for a lot of Instagram content sort of vibes, but we went to go surfing. And then we had a long layover in Taipei on the way home. And then I always put together a lot of food posts, so I just put them in their own category. And then lastly, I'm going to share all the costs so you know what you're getting yourselves into if you want to sort of recreate this trip on your own. So just a little bit about Indonesia. It's very, very large. You can see here Jakarta at about 7 o'clock. That's the capital. Bali is the left side red circle here, and then Komodo is located in the right side circle. So not too far from one another. Sulawesi, where we went last time, by contrast, is that weird looking island north of the middle red circle. That looks sort of like an S or an X shape. That's where we were last time, so a bit further flung. This time we stayed relatively close. I think this is important to scale too, just in terms of your distances. If you're ever looking into going to Indonesia, you have to think about, how far places are apart from one another. Bali and Komodo are roughly where Dallas and uh, Jackson, Mississippi probably would be on this map here. So not too far. Certainly doable in a 2 week trip. Okay, so from Chicago, we flew ORD, that's O'Hare, direct to Taipei. On the way there, we had about a 3 hour layover, so no big deal. And then onward to Bali. So Chicago to Taipei was about 16 hours on the way there. You're going against the wind. And then, if I remember correctly, Taipei to Bali was an additional 5.5 or 6 hours. We landed in the late afternoon, so we ended up just getting a hotel near the airport in Bali that night. Luckily, near the airport, there's plenty to do. There's nice beaches. It's actually a very touristy part of town, so it's not one of those situations where you need to take a taxi an hour to get where you want to go. We didn't hire a taxi at all. We walked out of the airport and walked 10 minutes to our hotel, and then from there it was another 10 minutes or so to the beach. We spent the night there and just sort of collected ourselves. And then the next morning we flew from Bali to Labuan Bajo, and that's about an hour flight. And then from there we got picked up at the airport, driven to the marina, which is about 5 minutes from the airport. And then we waited about an hour until our boat was ready. And then it was a 2 hour boat ride to what you're seeing in this photo, This was us finally stepping off the boat to the resort that we stayed at, which was called Scuba Junkie Komodo. Um, those folks who might have been in attendance for my Malaysia presentation last year might recognize that Scuba Junkie brand. We went to Scuba Junkie in Malaysia as well and had a great time, and they give you discounts for repeat visits. Now, resort is a heavy word to use because it's not a fancy place, and I'll show you a couple photos, but it's definitely not like a luxury resort. It is very basic. There's no internet, there's no TVs, there's no hot water. We opted for the fancy room, which fancy in this context means it had AC. But other than that, they don't have much. They don't even have liquor. They only have beer. So keep that in mind. A little bit about the map here. So Labuan Bajo is the big circle. The 2 hour boat ride down to Scuba Junkie to that little circle. It was a pretty slow boat. If there was a speed boat, it would have gone by much faster. But um, Komodo National Park is basically all the islands you see in this photo or this screenshot encompass the national park for the most part, including underwater. All of the scuba diving we did took place within the confines of this black circle here. And then we did visit Rincha Island, which is the big one towards like the bottom middle, to see the Komodo dragons, which obviously I'll get to as well, but just for some sense of scale here. So this was the marina. It was pretty hot. If you're in Chicago now, it was actually about this hot when we were sitting around waiting for the boat. Probably a little less hot than this, so I think you can handle it. Finally, after that 2 hour boat journey, we got to Scuba Junkie Komodo just in time for the sunset. We had to sign our documents and make sure we had the dive insurance, and then we dropped our bags off in the room, took a quick shower, and then came right back to the shore, grabbed a beer, and this was our view on not just the first night, but every single night for the next, I think, 5 nights we stayed there. So you could do much worse in terms of views. This was our room. You're going to see a lot of pictures of my wife wondering what I'm doing. She doesn't like when I take photos, but I like taking them, so too bad. This is our room. Like I said, pretty basic. You more or less see the whole thing here. The bathroom's behind there, basic bathroom. And then behind me, I don't have a picture of this stuff. That's why I'm describing it. Behind me, we have a front porch with a couple of chairs and a little table and like a drying rack for your towel. But there's not much to it. And there are cheaper options at Scuba Junkie. So when we get to the costs, if you see it at the end and think, oh my, that's too much even for me, we got, like I said, the fancy room. They also have like these garden bales that they come with a fan, and you're basically like out in the open. You have a roof, but you don't have a door. You're just basically a mosquito net over the bed, and those are really affordable. They're not for everybody because you're essentially sleeping outside, but we talked to a lot of the other guests while we were there, and people really like them. So if you're into that, then they have that. Okay, so scuba diving is the name of the game out here. Every single morning, we would load into the boat that we were assigned to. Typically at about 6:45 a.m. The dive sites, it's a big sprawling national park, and the boats are big and slow. So some of the dive sites are up to 2 hours away. This is the scene when we're all getting ready. The guy on the left actually was our dive guide throughout the trip. His name was Yoey. Very cool, very good dive guide. The picture here on the left is what the plan looks like. So in this one, you can see I'm listed in the middle boat on the Zephyus. Yoey is our dive guide. It's four people max per guide. And then it gives you the dive sites you'll be visiting and descriptions of them in that middle section there. You get on the boat, like I said, at about 6:45, and breakfast is served on the boat. That's this picture here on the right. There's always fresh fruit, pancakes, eggs, toast, jam, butter, peanut butter, stuff like that. And on the boat, there's always fresh water, coffee, and tea all day long. You also take lunch on the boat, which I don't have a picture of. So we leave at 6:45, and you don't typically get back until 4 or maybe even 5 in the afternoon. So you're on the boat all day. You're doing 3 dives. So a dive is about an hour, and then you do a surface interval of an hour, hour and a half, and then another dive, and then the surface interval, and a third dive, and then you head back. So it's a long day, but um, time goes by. There's about, I don't know, 10 or 12 other um, tourists on the boat with you. So lots of different people to speak with and hang out with. And there's this rooftop on the boat that has a shady area and a sunny area. This is a photo I took of our guide Yoi giving the dive briefing for this particular dive. So before every dive, you get the briefing. They tell you, how you're going to enter the water, how deep the dive is going to be, where the currents might be coming from, what sort of wildlife to look out for, and so on. So always focused on safety and making sure no major surprises happen. And then you jump in, and it looks like this. This this probably looks pretty cool to a lot of folks, but I'll tell you that it looked about 1,000 times cooler when you're actually underwater. I had a GoPro that I actually bought for this trip because I had a GoPro about 10 years ago and I kind of hated it and I got rid of it. And I figured, well, if I'm ever going to try again, the technology is better now. I'm going to do it for this trip in particular. And I did. And I was really satisfied with the video that the GoPro produces. But the photos are, they look like this. So they're not incredible. Um, that being said, I couldn't do videos for this particular presentation because they don't really translate well in this medium. It would look all choppy. But I'm gonna edit one and put one on YouTube for all to enjoy. So keep yourself apprised of that. Anyway, so super duper healthy coral reef, great abundance of fish life. As you can see here, lots of schools of little fish, but the big thing that Komodo is known for is the currents um, and the coral. And the currents and the coral bring two things. Well, one thing I guess is big species. So we saw a ton of manta rays, which if you don't know what a manta ray is, it looks like a stingray, but it's about the size of an SUV. And it doesn't, stingrays tend to stick to the sandy bottom, but manta rays, they're out in the open and they're cruising around. And they'll do flips and they'll do patterns and they'll sort of swim in groups. So it's pretty dramatic. And we'll be in a strong current, just doing our best to fight against it. So we're sort of stationary in place, and the manta rays would just be doing laps around us like it was nothing. So very powerful and cool creatures. We also saw tons of sharks and sea turtles, and we even saw a dugong, which is basically a manatee. So that was really cool. Our guide said that was the first dugong he saw in 2024, and that he only saw two all of last year. So they're a relatively special sight, and we happened to see one on our second dive of the whole trip. Um, this particular the dive site itself is called the Cauldron, and this part of it is called the Shotgun. This is a pretty infamous dive site in Komodo National Park. So basically, it's called the Cauldron because there's this sandy bottom bowl shaped area that you can see. It's the blue part of this screen here. And when you're in that cauldron, in that bowl, the water is very calm. But once you rise to come over this sort of cliff edge here, the current is shooting at such a fast pace that it shoots you. Actually, this is between two islands. There's a channel, and it shoots you through the channel. And the current can be strong enough to rip the mask right off your face. It isn't always though, and we ended up doing this dive site twice. This was from the second time we did it. What they do is they put these like grappling hooks on the side of the cliff edge here. The guides, they'll position it and then they'll call you up one at a time. And then when you come up from over that wall, you can see as the current starts ripping you away, you grab onto the rope and then you can sort of ride it. So you're floating in the water and letting the current sort of push you. And then all at the same time, he gives a signal, and then everybody at the same time lets go, and you sort of shoot through the channel together, like a roller coaster. So it's a lot of fun. Um, there's plenty of videos of this on YouTube if you were curious about seeing how the dive actually goes. And then I mentioned wildlife. Unfortunately, I didn't get any good photos of the manta rays or the dugong. I did have some, but I didn't want to put them in this presentation because they were just too far away. It translated a lot better on the and frankly, I prioritized video over photo while I was in Komodo. So you'll have to do with this mediocre picture of a sleeping sea turtle um, in the coral reef. Yeah, so like I said, when you're cruising around throughout the day, it's a long day, but it doesn't get boring. You can talk with other folks or opt to go up to the top and take a nap. The views never get old either. This is just a typical view cruising around the park. There's these dramatic, in this case, green. We went right after the rainy season, so everything was still green. If you went in, July, August, September, probably all these hills would be more yellowish because it's the dry season. And then behind me in this photo is the shady area on the boat where they got like beanbag chairs and a couple mattresses if you just wanted to like lay out and take a nap. And then when you get back at night, well, at like 4, usually they're well in time for a sunset. So they do a sunset cruise sort of thing with the boat, which I'll explain more in the next slide how that goes. But here in this slide, you can see the dinner spread that happens every night at 7 on the dot. And there's always great food, fried rice or noodles. There's these skewers here. They had chicken, beef, um, salad, fried tofu. They had like a some sort of soup going on at the end, and then plenty of um, sambal, which is the hot sauce there. So the reason the boat cruise goes out every night just before sunset is the scuba junkie is in a good location where it's only about a 5-10 minute boat ride from this phenomena that happens every night at dusk, where the flying foxes migrate from one mangrove island to another, and one of them they sleep and one of them they eat. So at dusk they all set out, and there's thousands upon thousands of them. And if you don't know what a flying fox is, it's a giant bat. If you've ever seen like Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, when he says those aren't birds. They're giant vampire bats. They're actually the flying foxes. So these are the same ones from Temple of Doom. So there's, like I said, thousands and thousands of them. And this photo doesn't do it justice at all. This takes place over the course of probably 15 or 20 minutes, just an endless parade of these foxes coming out of this mangrove and flying to the next island over. So you sit out there with the beer or whatever and enjoy. So we did I think 4 days of diving. And I can handle more. If you have more questions about the diving at Komodo, go ahead and ask at the end, because even though that was like the main thing of the trip, I feel like I glossed over a lot of it here in this presentation. So I'm happy to talk more about it. But at the end of the diving on our last morning, we checked out of Scuba Junkie, and then we paid for a local boat to take us to the actual Komodo National Park, which we split with 3 Australian guys. So it ended up turning out pretty affordable. So Komodo National Park, obviously this is where you can see the dragon. The Komodo dragon is the largest lizard in the world. And you're guaranteed to see them because some of them just live by the ranger station. So they're just taking a nap while this guy's telling you, about them. They are really big. This is another part where I have to apologize for the bad photo. I didn't actually bring my good camera on this trip because my bag was so packed and I knew I wasn't going to be bringing it underwater. And I sort of regret it because I knew there was going to be some cool photo opportunities here, but unfortunately you have to deal with just me zooming in with my my smartphone camera. But it's better than nothing, you know. So yeah, that's a dragon. They're really really big. Biggest lizard I ever seen. But they don't do too much. They sort of walk around and drink water, or they sit in the shadow. Um, and you do this nice little circuit though, which is probably besides the dragon, the highlight of this visit to the national park is you do like a 20-25 minute hike up and over a couple of hills here. And there's some really dramatic scenery. You can see those really tall palm trees in the back that rise above the canopy, and it's just a really nice scenic place. So after that, that local boat that we hired took us back to Labuan Bajo, which, like I said, is this sort of it's I don't know if it's a city. I think the population's pretty low, like 10 or 15,000, but it's up and coming sort of place. The government is actually trying to build it out to attract more tourists, which is good or bad depending on who you are in the equation. But you can see that there's a lot of new construction going up, and for example, here 10 years ago, there wasn't a stretch of roads that had like Italian restaurants and cocktail bars, but now there are. So you can enjoy a good cocktail and a pizza, which I did. That's how I know. Okay, so that was it for the Komodo area. The next day we flew back to Bali, and we actually flew over. Um, I thought I would position myself on the side of the plane, and I got lucky, and I did. So on this side of the plane, you can actually see that shotgun dive site. So right where I have the arrow pointed is where we dropped in. Like the boat was probably literally where the point of this arrow is. And you drop into the water and then head into that channel, and then the cauldron's in the middle of that channel, and then when you come up and over that wall edge, it shoots you in between those two islands, and you wind up on the other side. But I thought that was a good chance to take that photo. So over to Bali. The airport is in the lower peninsula there, right in that that really narrow point, just under the word Kuta. Um, we got picked up at the airport and driven to Ahmed, which is on the right hand side here, upper right, northeastern side of the island. So Ahmed is where we were at in 2019 that we really enjoyed, and that's about a 3 hour drive from the airport to there. And I don't think I put it in the costs slide. I think I forgot to do that, so I'll just mention now that that 3 hour taxi ride's about $50. And it was the same on the way back. Although we got dropped off in Canggu on the way back, but it's about the same. And then Canggu is, of course, that other red circle near Denpasar. So it's that western sort of coastal area, and that whole stretch of coast right there is known for surfing. So I'll get into why we picked Canggu later, though. So Ahmed's very nice. They built sidewalks since 2019. Last time we came here, they didn't have these nice sidewalks, so that was a little improvement. It's a very charming, small sort of fishing village. There's not too much tourism here. It's known for diving and snorkeling, but it's a special kind of diving, which I'll get into in a minute. So it doesn't attract too many divers because it's not just a general scuba diving thing. One other thing to point out right here, you can see in the background there is Mount Agung, which is an active volcano. That's actually the highest point in Bali, and you can hike to the top of it, except during rainy season. It takes 2 days, I think, to hike to the top, and you get there in time for sunrise. We've never done it. The first time we went, we were there during rainy season, so it was closed. And then this time we were gonna, but then we decided to surf instead. So we stayed at a hotel right on the beach. This was a view. This is our view on the very first night. They had live music. You can see here it's the black sand beaches, and very calm waves. It's not a surfing area here. And this was our room here. I think I do touch on this, but just in case you're wondering here in the moment, this room was like $25 or $30 a night, I think, and it was air conditioned and it did have hot water. And like I said, hotels right on the beach. It was a very modest hotel. It had a small pool and the attached restaurant. Pretty standard, but 25 or $30, not bad. Yeah, just an extra picture. This stretch of coast in Northeast Bali, like I said, has these sort of black sand, rocky beaches and these sweeping palm trees. You always have Mount Agung in the background looming over, and then this variety of boat lines the coast all up and down. So you'll see it everywhere at all times of day. So I mentioned the diving here. It's called muck diving. and it's sort of what it sounds like. There's very little in the way of coral. It's more about finding these specialized small critters that only live in this sort of like nutritionally rich runoff that happens in like different types of biomes, but specifically in this one, it's due to like the volcanic runoff. It gives I guess, the soil a special sort of nutrition, like a boost of nutrition that attracts a ton of specialty species that only exist in certain places. A lot of bizarre animals like scorpion fish and frogfish and crocodile fish and stargazers. We saw a mimic octopus, which is this really small, cool octopus. We didn't see it this time, but I've seen a blue ring octopus in a different muck diving location. Um, yeah, all kinds of stuff. It's difficult to photograph these things with the GoPro because some of them are as small as a fingernail, which the GoPro doesn't do. You can't zoom in or anything. Um, but this is what it looks like. You go out with the guide, and they know what they're looking for. They know what attracts certain species and stuff, so they always have something on the horizon. You can barely see it here, but in this particular photo, he's pointing at that it's a juvenile emperor angelfish, which is a very cool juvenile fish with this sort of psychedelic blue and white and black pattern on it. And it swims in such a way that it sort of shimmers in the sunlight. So we watched that for a few minutes, and it was really cool. Also on this stretch of coast is the USAT Liberty Wreck Dive, which is one of the most famous wreck dives in the world. It's a World War II American ship that I believe actually was beached. I think it was torpedoed by the Japanese and then beached, and then it was on the beach for like 30 years. And then in the 80s, I believe there was a massive earthquake that actually pushed it out into the sea. So since the 80s, it's become a very popular wreck dive because it's at the perfect depth um, for not just scuba divers, but even the the part that sticks up the closest to the surface is even good for snorkelers and free divers to see some cool stuff. But us being advanced divers, we were able to go to the deepest part. We dove this as well in 2019, and we actually were not planning to dive it again. But um, but it was tacked on because I had learned about this special type of diving called blackwater diving maybe a year ago. And if you haven't heard of it, basically what it is so there's night dives, which is what it sounds like. You sort of go out into a normal scuba site, and you sort of descend at about dusk, and then by the time you're in the thick of the dive, it's firmly nighttime, and you see what's going on in the coral reef or whatever at night instead of at day. Um, a blackwater dive is different. You go out after dusk and you go out into the open ocean, and the dive guide puts down sort of this pearl of lights on a rope, and you just jump into the open ocean. There's no bottom. It's thousands and thousands of meters down at that point. But what the lights do is they attract strange animals that arise from the depth of the dark sea. Anyway, that's exposition to say that we wanted to do one of those dives, but the dive shop that was running the Blackwater dive wouldn't let you do just that dive. You had to tack on two dives at the Liberty Wreck. So we said, all right, let's do it. So we did two dives at the Liberty Wreck. It was great. I don't need to go back though. But what we really wanted was this Blackwater dive, which was this was crazy and very, very scary. You can imagine if there's no frame of reference for where anything is, and it's really easy to let that like rope of lights that is supposed to be sort of your guiding light, no pun intended, because it's hanging off the boat, so you'll always be by the boat if you stay by the light. But it's easy to drift away and get distracted by something that you're looking at that's right in front of you, and then you turn back around and all of a sudden the light is dim in the distance. In fact, we lost it once, and the dive guide had to like figure out where it was. But you see some really cool stuff. Like this is a juvenile flounder. I guess they're like transparent and they just hang out in the middle of the ocean when they're babies. Who knew? These things, if you've ever been on a sandy bottom beach, they tend to cruise around on the bottom, flat as a pancake with both eyes sticking up, but they look like this when they're babies. We also saw some really intense and cool looking jellyfish that were like literally glowing and pulsating, and other things like that. We also saw a nautilus, which I guess is exceedingly rare, but I didn't get a good photo of that. So if you want to see what a nautilus looks like, open a new tab. The craziest thing we saw, um, and I only had this on video, so you're just gonna have to trust me. But a whale shark cruised by in the dark of night. Um, we all shined our flashlights on it, and it was about 15 or 20 feet away from us, and it was about the size of a short bus. Um, and this area is not even particularly well known for whale sharks. If you know whale sharks, you know they tend to be migratory and you can predict where they're going to be. But and so some places are sort of whale shark hotspots for people who want to snorkel or dive with them or whatever. And this area is not a whale shark hotspot. People don't come here to see whale sharks. So it was a major surprise for everybody. But it cruised right past us, and I got it on video for about 3 or 4 seconds. And I'm gonna have to put that into the edit when I do put together that footage. But it was cool. My wife actually thought she didn't realize it was a whale shark. She thought it was a tiger shark for some reason, even though I don't think those exist here. And she spent the remainder of the dive uh, scared out of her mind. Uh, I felt bad for her afterwards when I learned that, but I knew it was a whale shark. And if you don't already know, whale sharks are not aggressive. They eat like krill and plankton or whatever. Um, they don't target people, so they're not a danger. So that was that. And then the next day we did the 3 hour taxi journey to Canggu. Canggu is very, very, very touristy. We picked it. We tend to shy away from the very touristy places, but we wanted to surf, and there's not that many beginner surf spots in Bali. And out of the 3 or 4 options, Canggu is actually the least touristy of the bunch, which goodness, if it is, I wouldn't want to see the other places like Kuta or Seminyak, because this place was just crawling with people who were dying to like post on Instagram. But the surfing was fun, and I think this was our second time surfing, and it was a little less beginner friendly than the first time we went, but it was still, I think, decent for beginners. We did 2 surf lessons, 2 mornings back to back. That the lessons began at 8 a.m. I think, and they were an hour and a half. So then we had the whole day ahead of us after the surf lessons, which we filled with doing things like going to cocktail bars and restaurants. We went to a spa and got a coffee scrub and a massage. And all these things they're relatively affordable here still, even if not more expensive than all the other places we were throughout the rest of the trip, just because it has that added sort of tourist edge. This was a cocktail bar we went to that was serial killer themed. So if you're like a true crime fan, um, all of the cocktails are named after various serial killers. And then she's not pictured here, but the curator of the drinks, she'll come up to you and explain why the drink is what it is based on the serial killer's, modus operandi. Like one of them had like I forget, like mint in it, and it was because the serial killer always left like a sprig of mint in his victim's ear after the killing took place or something. And these are like real. I'm making up the mint thing. It was some other plant that was a little more dramatic, but that was one of the actual sort of reasonings into the concoction. It was a lot of fun. Okay, so the last phase of the trip was that long layover in Taipei. We actually had this too when we went back in 2019. The way that the Ava Air sort of times the trip, you get basically 24 hours. So we got to our hotel at 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, and then we weren't taking off again until 9 o'clock the following evening. So we went to bed that first night. Unfortunately, we arrived too late. Last time we went to they have night markets in Taipei that are just like a bunch of food stalls and stuff like that. We got early enough in 2019 to do that, but this time our flight was delayed about 30 or 45 minutes. So unfortunately, a little too late. But we had the whole next day ahead of us. Um, we just walked around town. We shopped a little. We ate a bunch, and we did this hike up Elephant Mountain, they call it, which is basically just a little hill cliff uh, walk they have on the side of the city where you get this nice view. And they say it takes 45 minutes to an hour, but we're pretty good at hiking, I guess. We ended up doing it in like 15 or 20. We did get really sweaty though. So if you do it, be warned about that. Um, but that was it. We went to a museum. Like I said, we went out to a restaurant that we were looking forward to doing, and then we ended up happening across a uh, basically like a farmer's market, but for I don't know what they would call them, a farmer's market, but for like clothes. And then there was some food stalls there too. But they just set up on the street this long line of apparel and clothing vendors that were selling on the street. So that was fun to run into. And that's it. And then we packed it up and headed to the airport. Um, so yeah, that's the trip. I'll get into some of the food. Obviously, plenty of Indonesian food. This is not Indonesian. This is Thai, but plenty of Indonesian food. While we were at Scuba Junkie, we could only eat the sort of buffet style food there, which was always great, which was all Indonesian. So when we got out of Scuba Junkie, we tended to mix it up. So this was a Thai restaurant that we had in Ahmed. This was a Chinese restaurant, like a Szechuan place that we had in Canggu. This was great. This was one of my favorite meals of the trip. The hotel in Ahmed that we stayed at was actually the restaurant attached to it was an Italian restaurant, actually one that we had visited in 2019, just right on the beach, as you saw. At the time, the hotel portion of the restaurant didn't exist, but the owner bought the adjacent property and built the hotel. So now it's a hotel and restaurant. And I had the chicken parmesan in 2019, but it wasn't on the menu here in 2024. And the owner was walking around schmoozing with the guests, and I mentioned this, and he goes, "Oh," he goes, "I remember that chicken parmesan. I can have him make it for you." So he he just had an off-menu chicken parmesan that he made. He had his kitchen staff make for me, which was really really nice. This was a pizza. This I had like three pizzas, I think. This one particularly was in Canggu. This was probably the best of the three. And then in Canggu, also we happened upon a Colombian restaurant of all things, and we it was like a fancy place actually. One of those like shared plates and a bottle of wine or fancy cocktails. So this was sort of our splurge. I think this was actually our last night of the trip. And this is an oblea, which is a Colombian dessert. And then in Taipei, we went to Kikimbo Ramen, which is there's three of them I think in the world. One is Tokyo, which we had in 2016. This is a ramen place that's known for like super duper spicy ramen. Most ramen in Japan is not spicy. You have to go out of your way to find spicy ramen, and this is one of them that has a great reputation. And we went to it in Tokyo in 2016. Then in 2019, when we were doing this trip, we walked past it in Taipei. I didn't know it existed, and we got all excited we didn't know they had a Taipei uh, location. They also have a Hong Kong location. I came to find out, and we got all excited and we went to go in, and they said, "Nope, we're closed. We close between 2 and 5 every day." And unfortunately, that time we had to leave at 5 for the airport, so we weren't able to go. So this time it was the number one thing we made sure to do in Taipei, and it was worth it. So that's it. So getting into the costs, this is the last main slide before we'll get into the Q&A section. But the costs, the airfare from Chicago was 1,100 round trip per person. We used points, so we paid 0 per person. This won't come as a surprise, but this is quite a bit up from 2019. All airfares up since the pandemic, but in 2019 I checked and we paid 750 per person. Now it's 1,100. Then domestic flights, it was 150 round trip for Bali to Labuan Bajo, and I think that's on the high end. I think if we picked the flights we wanted, but the you could probably get away for like about half that, like 75 round trip if your dates were flexible. Taxis were normal for this part of the world. Airport taxi can run like $15, $10, but just getting around town, like Canggu, we taxied around a lot with Grab, which is basically like Uber, and it would be like $2 to $4 depending on the distance and time. Um, our Labuan Bajo hotel was $50. I mentioned in Ahmed, it was really cheap, 25. Canggu is more expensive at 90, and Taipei, the hotel was 120. And actually, we had to pay for 2 nights because we got in that first night, but then we weren't leaving for the airport the next day until 7 or whatever. So we paid for 2 nights. So that was kind of a blow to the wallet, considering we were only really there for. But oh well. Dinner and drinks, unsurprisingly, runs the gamut. You can go to a local, just like lunch special place and get a full meal and a big glass of juice for $3. Or you can go to like a Western restaurant and get a beer and a burger and stuff and pay 15 or $20. Um, so the Scuba Junkie, well, you can see I used my template from last time. It's not Mobile, it's Scuba Junkie Komodo. Um, I looked up, it was $825 per person. That was for 6 days, 5 nights, 12 dives, and all the meals and the boat ride to and from Labuan Bajo. Well, to Labuan Bajo. Back, we took that local boat from the national park. So it included a bunch of stuff. So it's difficult to sort of do the math based on how much of that was the diving versus the actual hotel versus all the meals and stuff. But that's how much it costs. $825 each. In Ahmed, you did pay by the dive, and it was $35 a dive. The Blackwater dive was 3 dives. We paid 150 each. So if you do the math there, if a shore dive is 35, that's 70 for 2, which means what the Blackwater dive itself was $80, which is high if you're a scuba diver. That's on the really high end of how much a dive should cost. But obviously, all the logistics and the special nature of everything, I would say was very much worth it. And then last but not least, surf lessons. We went with, I did, as I tend to do, vigorous research, and we landed on this place I had a good feeling about, called Bali Salty Surf School. It's basically just this guy named Juliawan, and he's got a couple buddies who sort of like quote unquote work for him. Private lessons, one-on-one. It was $25 per person for an hour and a half. So we did that twice, 2 people, and spent $100 over the course of the 2 days. And I put his in there in case you were ever in Bali, because like I said, Canggu is a popular place. So I imagine people on this call, or if you're going to Bali, Canggu is probably on your radar. So if you're going to surf, go with Juliawan. He was great. And that's it. This is my final slide. Nicolette, if we want to jump into Q&A.
Thank you again for presenting, Derek. That was awesome. Yes, while we wait for folks to enter their questions into the Q&A box, I'd like to take a moment to go through some announcements. So first, thank you to all the folks who donated to today's program. With your continued support, we can keep these events free for all. If you have not donated and would like to, you can go ahead and scan this QR code. We'll take you to our website where you can access our PayPal to donate. And again, you can also go straight to our website, geographicsociety.org, and find out more that way. The next travelogue will be Reflections in a Mermaid's Eye, and this will take place on Tuesday, July 16th at 1 p.m. More information about this will come up next week and will be available on our website.
Wait, Nicolette, go back to that one. For people who might not know, this is a whale shark. So this was the thing that cruised past me in the middle of the night on the dive. Picture this, and it's the length of like 2 SUVs back to back.
Oh my goodness, that's pretty large. All right, we're going to be having a Chicago River walking tour on Saturday, August 17th. This will take place in Goose Island along their boardwalk. It'll be about a 40-minute walking tour discussing the history and the design of the park. And followed by the presentation will be food and drink at Oxfeller Brewing, located on Kingsbury Street. Cost for members is $20 and $50 for non-members. If you are someone who's not a member and perhaps a senior or a student on this webinar today, you will save $10 if you sign up to be a member. You can go ahead and scan that QR code or visit our website to register. Finally, we do have Biodiversity Festival scheduled for September 21st in Big Marsh Park. Please come and enjoy a fun-filled day in nature. We'll have a bunch of different organizations come out and give presentations on various different habitats, organisms, and animals that live in the area. All right. So now we will go ahead and get back to our presentation and move on to the Q&A portion. First question we have is, can you also snorkel?
So judging on when this question came in, I imagine, Nancy, you're referring to Komodo. So yeah, so I did a really like scuba dive intensive trip where I went to a dive resort that does scuba diving for people who want to scuba dive, right? From Luwu and Bajo, though, there's plenty of other options to sort of explore Komodo National Park that have nothing to do with scuba diving. So I know a popular option is you can go on like a 2-day, 1 night, or 3-day, 2-night cruise around the area where it brings you to several different islands, including the Komodo National Park where you see the dragons. There's another island I didn't visit called Padar Island that is very popular because you can hike to the top of it and there's this dramatic view where on one side is a pink sand beach and another side is a black sand beach. Um, and and on those sorts of trips you can also there's also plenty of snorkeling stops, so you can absolutely snorkel. That being said, you'll probably see a good amount of like coral reef and like and fish, but you're probably not going to see like the super dramatic stuff because the dramatic stuff comes out in the areas where there's a really strong current, and they don't want to throw snorkelers in the water when there's a strong current because they'll be zipped out to sea. um, but it's still, I would say, well worth it because there's, while I focused here on like what's going on underwater, Komodo still has tons going on above water that attracts probably the vast majority of tourists that go there. And then, yeah, there's also plenty of snorkeling all over Bali too.
Awesome. All right. Next question is, how were the mosquitoes on the sunset night when you sat outside?
I'm the wrong person to ask because for some reason mosquitoes have an aversion to me. I get bit by like one mosquito a year. My wife, on the other hand, is a mosquito magnet, and I do remember her spraying mosquito spray because it was got in my face a couple times. That being said, I don't think it wasn't crazy. There's where we were positioned, there wasn't any sort of like stagnating water. It was the open ocean. So I think they do pretty well to make sure that the mosquitoes aren't a major issue. I wouldn't worry about it.
All right. Next question. Did you experience any civil or political unrest in Indonesia?
No, not at all. Um, these particular areas, I don't, not in 2024, are not necessarily a hot spot for those sorts of things. I was there, like the new president just got elected a couple weeks before I went, and I actually wondered if there would be any sort of political stuff going on, because he's the son, I think the son, or the son-in-law of like the dictator that reigned for a long time back in the day. but it didn't happen. I don't want to go too deep into it, but we could talk more about the politics of Indonesia outside of this call. But there are a couple areas that there is civil unrest. One of which is another very popular scuba diving destination, Raja Ampat, which some say is like the best in the world. And that's in West Papua, which is like the island of New Guinea, you know. And there's a pretty strong sort of protracted civil war going on there because West Papuans don't want to be Indonesian; they want to be independent. I don't think it typically spills over into like the scuba diving areas, but it's not too far away. Um, so it's certainly, I don't know, something to look out for. But in these areas of Indonesia right now, no, there's no risk of that really.
The next question we have is, how does the dive guide tell you all about what you are seeing underwater? I'm assuming the technology in which you communicate underwater.
Yeah, I mean, so there's hand signals for everything. Like shark looks like this, and like sea turtle looks like this, and scorpion fish, and I don't know what else, like frogfish. There's something for everything. Octopus looks like this. So if you are ever unclear, all you need to do is sort of remember the things. Some guides too will bring down a slate that has like a some sort of technology where you can writes on it underwater with a marker, and he can write down something more complicated. Or worst case, you see something cool and you sort of go like this, and then you do this like, hey, can you remember that one for me? And then we'll be like, yep. And then when you get to the surface, you'll say, what was that? What was that orange and white fish we saw? And they're like, oh, that was a a painted frogfish. Cool, huh? And then that's part of their what the guides are really good at is like making sure you know what's you're seeing. So if you got a good guide, you'll know.
Awesome. Were any of the animals in the water dangerous ones?
Yeah. I mean, we saw plenty of scorpion fish and I think stonefish, which are very, very venomous. They tend to sit on the bottom and they blend in. So
Oh boy.
if you kneeled on them or something and they stung you, you'd be in trouble. But I mean, that's why you have to have good buoyancy and not like touch stuff without really thinking about it. I mean, ideally, you don't touch anything when you're underwater. Uh, because that sort of thing can happen. That said, there's almost nothing underwater that is going to attack you. Um, the one exception on this trip, though, is a trigger fish, which the trigger fish is this. This is the hand signal. Um, those are very territorial when they have eggs that they're protecting, and they've got big like buck teeth. They're not too big. They're probably about the size of I don't know, a keyboard. Um, and I actually have a video of at one point we got too close to the nest of a triggerfish and it started attacking my guide, and I got it all on video. It's funny. It
Oh
would go
my
after
God.
my guide, and he had to like kick it away with his fins, and then it would like go back and regroup, and then sort of like power up and like lash out at him again. And it went back and forth 4 or 5 times before we got away. But
Was he
uh,
okay?
yeah, he was okay. I mean, those things will take a little chunk out of you with their buck teeth, but they're not like venomous or gonna really get you. And also, when you see one, you know to avoid it, so it's not really like a big risk. But that's one of the very few exceptions, I guess, to the rule of like most fish don't have any interest in you, so just leave them alone and you'll be fine.
Great to know. Nancy says thank you and great trip. And we have a final question. Did you get any sense of discontent with over tourism?
Um, so I'm trying to think. I do know I read an article before I left that, and this tends to be the case in like areas targeted for tourism by state governments, such as the case in Komodo, and especially when national parks are declared, that there can be contention with like indigenous populations. And I did read an article before I left that that was the case in Komodo National Park, that several villages worth of folks were relocated to make way for the planned tourism that the government has. which obviously is which obviously is very unfortunate. I didn't meet anyone who had anything to say about that. That being said, almost everybody I spoke with was in the tourism business, so um, you know, I don't, they probably wouldn't open up to me because I'm a tourist, so they wouldn't want me to hear that they dislike the fact that I'm there, right? Which is, it's sort of a double-edged sword, or whatever the phrase I want right there is. Because I would love to talk to them about that, but then they would probably be a little, apprehensive to making me feel bad. Um, but it's certainly something I was thinking about the whole time, especially too with the quick construction that was going up in Lubu and Bajo to house the tourists and feed them and stuff. In Canggu, it's yeah, I mean, it used 10, 20 years ago it was just rice paddies, and now it's just like line after line of like designer apparel shops and stuff. So I'm quite sure there's a lot of discontent going on in that part of Bali. That being said, again, I would have to be doing an actual like project, I think, to find somebody who's willing to engage with me honestly about that thing. But I can only imagine that there's quite a lot of locals who aren't aren't happy that their home has turned into a circus.
Mm, their perspective. Thank you so much, Derek. These are all the questions that we received. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us. Make sure you take some time to donate today. And we all hope you have a great rest of your day.